Hi folks, and welcome to the new year. Anyway, I was gifted a couple of knives over Christmas, and they were all UK legal non-locking folders, and so I thought I'd take an opportunity to revisit the subject. I touched on it briefly in a previous video on UK legal bushcraft knives. You know, this is more as an EDC point of view that you might use around your property, give you an overview, and maybe something that looks interesting and you might want to add to your collection. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on the law, but there are restrictions in place in the UK. You can't go out in public, broadly speaking, with a knife over 3-inch blade and one has a locking blade. So it's got to be a folder, non-locking, and a blade under 3 inch. I did have some feedback about the law allows some interpretation, but you know, I think that's up to everyone's discretion how much justification they want to provide to an officer of the law. So I'll start off this discussion with two knives that I was very kindly given recently, and you know who you are, so thank you very much, much appreciated. But anyway, the two knives are quite different, certainly in their look and you know the manufacturing, etc., and also where they come from. So we start off with the Svord Peasant knife, and that is made in New Zealand, and then we have also the real steel Lunar Lite. So the Svord Peasant is actually, I think, fairly well known, certainly in the UK now, very well known knife. But this is a particularly nice sort of version of it. It's got the wooden scales because there's quite a lot that come in plastic scales, but the wooden ones makes it look even more traditional and just makes it look like a nicer knife. Very simply made, but that does allow them to keep the prices down to really an incredibly low level, I think, for a knife made in, you know, a place like New Zealand, shipped worldwide. They are very affordable and very functional knives. The blade steel appears to be really good. Some time ago, I've tried out the plastic handled version of this, and you know, the blade held up to a lot of abuse, but you know, relatively cheap knife, or very cheap knife really. I do think the wooden handled version is much nicer, particularly with the brass screws. One of the advantages of these friction folders is that you can actually open it one-handed. Now, a lot of the non-locking folders have quite a lot of tension in the spring, and that's to allow some level of safety. So although it doesn't lock, it is quite firm. Whereas with these friction folders, there's no tension, and it's actually easy to open with one hand, which you know can be quite an advantage in an EDC blade. So as I say, the second one that I was given was this real steel Lunar Lite. Now, the person who gave it to me mentioned that this was will be considered a gentleman's knife. And you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, the gentleman's knife category is something that could be taken to a more formal occasion. So I guess in places like America, we carry knives a lot all the time, you know, appear less intrusive and have a smaller blade, so this will often be taken in a more formal dress. So it's very slim, slender, has a pocket clip, deep carry, and you know, would be quite unobtrusive. Now this particular model, it's got a D2 steel, which is, you know, it's a pretty decent steel really. This blade geometry is quite incredible. From a slicing perspective, it looks like an absolutely amazing little slicer. From an EDC perspective, probably wouldn't want to subject it to too much heavy duty use with such a thin blade, but it does feel like a very slimline, slender, streamlined knife, I'd say. And it's the light version, so it is very lightweight. You could have this in your pocket and really not feel it. You know, I lost a couple of sort of more traditional looking pen knives of this type when I was a boy. You know, I was out in the bush and they just fell out of my pocket, and you know, I was devastated at the time. But you know, these clips can be really useful to prevent that. Alright, so the next one I was going to take a look at is a Taylor Eyewitness Barlow knife. They may not all look identical to this in design, but I think most people maybe would recognize that as a Barlow style knife. And this company, Taylor's Eyewitness, they actually are a Sheffield based company. You know, they were once a powerhouse of, you know, blade and steel manufacturing. much less so in this day and age. So it's quite nice that there's still a commercial company producing, fairly high quality knives at a modest price, and this is certainly one of those examples. This knife was actually recommended on my previous video. The viewer said, take a look at these guys, they produce good quality, affordable knives, and so I did, and it is a really nice and fairly affordable knife, one made in the UK. Quality is really good. It's also one of those knives, so some folders will just fold all the way down. Good quality folders have a sort of a stop that prevents it from just snapping down onto your fingers when you close it. So it's not a lock, but it has a little stop halfway, and this Taylor's Eyewitness actually has one of those. Quite a small little knife, certainly if you compare it to the Peasant. It's geometry wise really small in your pocket, you'll hardly notice it. Alrighty, so the next one up is the Swiss Army knife. Now, this was the one I did mention in my previous video, so I won't go into too much detail, but certainly Swiss Army knives, everyone knows them. When I was a youngster, this was my sort of first upgrade from my early traditional type of knife. And certainly in the Scouts and when I did my national service, I had some version of a Swiss Army knife with me all the time. They were very useful, and I think if you like the additional functionality of the extra blades, and that's in that instance, a Swiss Army knife can be a really good alternative. So next up, this is it's a really sort of traditional looking pocket knife, similar to the sort of Barlow style. Now this I got from a individual maker. Interestingly, he actually apprenticed at Taylor's Eyewitness in Sheffield, and then branched out on his own and just he has a small home workshop and makes his own knives, and he still lives in Sheffield, sort of keeping the flame alive in Sheffield. So I did want to support him. It's probably not a knife that I would be carrying on a daily basis. It's a little bit outdated. You can't open it with one hand. It doesn't have that secondary lock, it just opens all the way. It's quite a small narrow blade. But it is a nice piece, being handmade, and it's nice to support local industry. But that is your typical old school pen knife, and as I said, I had versions looking like this when I was a boy, and they're still very functional. So this next one is the Spyderco UK pen knife. Pretty well known, I guess, certainly in the UK, but I think elsewhere as well. I mean, Spyderco is a very, very famous brand, make amazingly good knives, and this is no exception. I think it's a really good option, this, because it's well made. The materials are all high quality. The blade steel is the CTS BD1N, and from what I can gather, it's a really good all-round sort of almost Goldilocks blade steel. It does pretty much everything well, so it may be outclassed in certain categories, but as a general blade steel, the general consensus is it's actually a really good all-rounder. It's very light. It has a deep carry pocket clip, made in the States, because I know Spyderco, a range that they make elsewhere offshore. Blades that they make in the States tend to be more expensive, and this one is still very affordable. So it opens to the first stop, and then you can open it fully. But what's really good about this, even though it has the restriction of having some friction to stop it closing, you can actually open it with one hand. It has this finger choil there, which allows you to hold it quite securely with jimping on both underneath and the top. So you can actually hold it quite securely for use, which does overcome some of the problems of not having a lock. It doesn't totally remove the problems, but this is a very well thought out design. They've really considered how they could, make a product that would be legal in the UK, and they've done an exceptional job. And from what I understand, it's a really, really good seller, this fantastic blade. So I couldn't do this one without also talking about the knife that I previously recommended in the bushcraft version of this video, and that's this one that was made by Orford. It's also a friction folder. Now this is a little bit stiffer than the Svord, but you can still open with one hand. Very well made knife, much thicker blade steel, Scandi grind, you know, big, quite a large, comfortable grip. This is a great knife. It's really good if you are looking for something that is legal to use in the UK for more outdoor based activities. You know, so it's quite restrictive what you could use if you want something strong and robust, but this is a very good option. The feedback I had was, you know, how could I recommend something that's so expensive? And, you know, fair enough, it is way more expensive than any of these other knives. Orford has done really well as a company, so his products aren't readily available anymore. You have to wait quite a while, and then, you know, the prices are pretty high really. I still think it's a great knife, but it's not easy to recommend something that's hard to get and costs a lot of money. So for a bit of fun, I've arranged these in order of price. This is the cheapest and that's the most expensive. Now this line here is pretty much the £100 mark, so everything on this side is well under £100. This guy actually needs to be off the screen because he's well over £100. So, you know, for the purpose of this particular comparison, let's move him right out the screen. Too expensive. Well, if we start with the cheapest, then you're getting a very functional, very well priced and high quality knife. This is a high carbon tool steel, so it's good quality steel, will work for most applications. Nothing fancy. Simple aesthetic, but very functional. The Lite, you're getting a very modern looking blade, very compact, very good for slicing, D2 steel. I believe most of these are made in the Far East, I believe, so you know, whether that worries you or not, but it's a very good design, very high quality, but also very affordable. With the Taylor's Eyewitness, it's a very traditional knife made in Sheffield. It is high quality, it's fairly standard stainless steel blade, but it would work well in a number of applications, and you know, not a bad option. Swiss Army knives, you know, they go without saying, they're good quality. Everybody, you know, probably has tried one at some time in their life. Made in Switzerland, and you know, there's so many options you can choose from. I have this one in my first aid kit all the time. I have another one in another bag. I have one in my car, so very useful to have around, and it's amazing how often you'll use them. Spyderco, this is a really good option, I think, for price. Great steel, very functional, well thought out. It's still, you know, relatively inexpensive for an American-made blade with good quality materials, so you know, I think a really good option. And then this is really the similar sort of price, but there's a different reason for buying one of those to buying something like the Spyderco. Here you're supporting old school, this aesthetics and manufacturing, and you want a traditional looking blade. Very functional, very traditional. So my top picks start off with this Svord Peasant, made New Zealand, simple design, good steel. Is it really 10 to 15 times lower quality than this one? Very similar design? I think not. I think this is a great option, very good price, and you know, very, very usable. And then my second pick really has to be the Spyderco. Very well thought out design, great materials, very lightweight, has the deep carry pocket clip which keeps it secure in your pockets. You know, you can't go wrong with this knife. You know, all that being said, I think, you know, knives are very subjective. People have different uses, you know, different reasons for considering different price points. A video like this really is just sort of interest, gives some people an idea of how different knives compare to each other. You know, my opinion is definitely not going to be the same as anyone else's. But, you know, it'd be fun to hear what you guys think. I'm sure a lot of you have both these knives and maybe some of the others as well. So, you know, it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say. Put them in the comments below. And, you know, hopefully this was of interest. It was fun for me to make. And hopefully I'll see you on the next video. So thanks for watching. See you next time.